Good morning, Vitalpoint family. It's so good to be with you this morning. My name's Steve McCready. Whenever I'm not doing this, like traveling around speaking at churches, my day job is that I run a youth leadership camp up in Muskoka. But aside from that, I have this other little side hustle that I do that I'm a seminary professor. And so I coach seminary students doing their master's degrees, their doctoral degrees. And that takes me all over the place, and I get to meet lots of very interesting students, lots of very interesting people. I want to tell you about one lady that I met recently because her story has really captivated me. I had flown down to the United States to meet with a cohort of students. And as we were chatting together and I was getting to know my cohort, this young lady had an incredible French accent, like ooh la la. It was this beautiful French accent. And my thought was, yes, she's a Canadian. And so as I was getting to know her, I kind of probed a little bit. And she's like, nope, I'm an American. I'm not a Canadian. Of course, she said it with a French accent. And then I probed a little bit further because I thought, okay, she's not a Canadian. Maybe she's actually French. Maybe she's a European like myself. So we'll find a deep connection there. But I kept probing. No, I'm totally an American. And so I probed and probed to the point where I think I annoyed her. And she said, Steve, shall I just tell you about the accent? And being someone with an accent, I was very excited to hear. And then she told me a story that just blew my mind. Whenever she was very young, like in her 20s, this young woman had a massive stroke and died. She died on the table. And when they resuscitated her, her brain had rewired itself. This is genuinely a thing. It's called foreign accent syndrome. And when she came back to life, she came back to life with a totally different voice, a totally different accent, a totally different sound, a new sound. And that story has really stuck with me. I've thought about it every week since I came across this particular lady, because to me, that's the story of every Christian and of every church. We are a group of people who have died and been born again. And now you and I are supposed to have a different sound, a different accent. What is that new sound? Every Christian should sound the same. And it's not the accent of this world, it's the accent of another kingdom. And that's what I want to talk about today. It's the sound of joy. It's the sound of joy. When the world hears us, when the world hears you, when the world hears the church, it should hear joy. And in our passage today, John chapter 17, we get to listen in as Jesus prays for this very thing for us. That we might have, this is the words of Jesus, that we might have the full measure of his joy within us. Joy is his prayer. Joy is our prize. And joy is what equips us to live in a twisted world. So let's read the text together. We join Jesus. He's in the very holiest of holies, the thin place where heaven touches earth. This is the upper room farewell, the section of John's gospel that holds this precious experience of Jesus getting ready to go to the cross. And this is a passage that has a really precious place in my heart as well, because when I was writing my own doctoral discourse, I wrote it on John chapter 15. When Jesus invites his disciples into a brand new identity, he says to them, you are no longer servants, but friends. And now it's as friends that you and I are invited into this new level of intimacy. What we're studying today, the prayer of Jesus. Jesus says these words, I will remain in the world no longer, but they are still in the world. And I am coming to you, Holy Father, protect them by the power of your name. The name you gave me, so that they may be one as we are one. While I was with them, I protected them and kept them safe by that name you gave me. None has been lost except the one doomed to destruction so that scripture would be fulfilled. I am coming to you now, but I say these things while I'm still in the world so that they may have the full measure of my joy within them. I've given them your word, and the world has hated them, for they are not of the world any more than I am of the world. My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. For them I sanctify myself, that they too may be truly sanctified. We thank God for his holy word. Whenever I was 16, that was a long time ago, I had a part-time job working in a gas station, and I have to tell you, I absolutely loved that job. It had a small supermarket attached to it, and my work was simple. Stand behind the till, mop the floors, stack the shelves. It was the right amount of boring, but at the same time, the right amount of fascinating. Because if you like to people watch, then working in a gas station is perfect, because everybody needs to go to a gas station. At least back in those days, they did. Police cars, motorbike gangs, ride-on lawnmowers. You got to see everyone, the full spectrum of humanity. And wild things happened every single day. I once caught a thief in the store with about $400 of bacon stuffed down his jeans. Another time, I caught two of my high school teachers having a secret romance in aisle 3. It was a job full of surprises, but also full of routine. And one thing that was guaranteed was that every week, someone would destroy their car by putting the wrong fuel in. That's just what happened. Every single week, somebody would put diesel in a petrol car and petrol in a diesel car. For us as Jesus followers, the fuel of our faith is joy. When Nehemiah gathered his people to hear God's word, they wept at how far they'd fallen. And this is what he said to them: "Do not grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." Joy is what gives us strength. Joy is what keeps us moving. But how many of us are trying to run our lives on the wrong fuel? How many of us are running on empty? How many of us are moving through this twisted world on fumes? Jesus' prayer for his people, for you and for me, is that we have the full measure of his joy within us. Joy is our fuel. Joy is our strength. If we're going to live lives of meaning and purpose, and at the same time impact this twisted world, we must become a church of joy. How's your joy tank today? Is it full? Is it half empty? Jesus' desire, his prayer, is that your joy tank, our joy tank, would be full to the brim, the full measure. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. Theologian Scott McKnight captures this passage really well. He says, "Those who know the Father through the Son, who have heard Jesus pass on the Father's truth, who have accepted that message, who understand who Jesus is as God's Son, and who obey the Son, are the ones who comprise the church." What he's explaining about this passage is that this prayer isn't just for a group of disciples huddled in a room 2,000 years ago. It's for us. It's for the church. Jesus knows we're going to live in a world that's twisted, hostile, confusing at times, a world that rejects him and rejects the Father. But instead of praying for our escape, he equips us. Look at verse 15. "My prayer is not that you take them out of the world." So how do we stay strong? How do we stay joyful in a world that seems bent out of shape? I believe that Jesus' prayer teaches us how to find joy, the fuel that keeps us going. In fact, in 3 places in this passage, he shows us the way. The joy is found in knowing the Father's plan. The joy is found in knowing the Father's protection. And the joy is found in knowing the Father's purpose. Let's look at these one at a time. Number 1, we find joy in the Father's plan. Verse 13 says this: "I am coming to you so that they may have the full measure of my joy within them." In the upper room, everything must have felt like it was falling apart. Judas had left, the cross was coming, The world was closing in, but Jesus knew the Father's plan was unfolding perfectly. The story wasn't out of control. It was under divine control. That's the paradox of faith. Joy grows deepest, not in the absence of struggle, but in the place of sovereignty. We can rejoice because the God who writes redemption into crucifixion is the same God writing purpose into your pain. He wastes nothing. Not your detours, not your disappointments, not even your delays. So when the world feels twisted, we hold on to this. God's plan has not slipped out of his hands. Joy begins there, in trusting that his plan is still unfolding, even when life feels like it's unraveling. When I was a young leader, I had the privilege of meeting one of my heroes, a theologian named Adjith Fernando. The reason I loved Adjith wasn't just because he was a brilliant mind, it was because he was a brilliant man. I first discovered his work when I was a young scholar. I bought a set of Bible commentaries. And when I reached the book of Acts, which he had written, I was captivated by Adjith's ability to connect deep scholarship with real life. And that's become one of the guiding goals and goalposts of my life and my ministry, to bridge theology and practice and bring them together. One of the things that amazed me about Adjith wasn't that he was a scholar who sat behind a desk. His day job was working with teenagers. He was the national director of Youth for Christ in Sri Lanka, a youth worker with theological muscle. I was in. Years later, I was working myself as the national director of Youth for Christ in Northern Ireland. And at this point in time, my ministry was taking me places around the world. And I'd been invited to speak at a conference in Italy. And I couldn't believe it when I arrived in Bologna to discover that my roommate for the week was Adjith Fernando. My stocking was complete. I joke, of course, but what an opportunity to meet someone who has been mentoring you for a decade without even knowing you. And that night, over coffee and a long theological conversation, Adjith said something to me that I have never forgotten. I want to share it with you today. Something that's been a constant source of joy through 20 years of ministry and leadership in this twisted world. This is what he said: Steve, if God is truly sovereign, then the only thing to fear is God himself. That line has stayed with me ever since. If God is sovereign, then we don't have to fear the twists and turns and the unknowns or the things we can't control. We find joy in his sovereign plan. Jesus did, and we should too. That's number one. Number two, we find joy in the Father's protection. John 17:11 says this: Holy Father, protect them by the power of your name. The little Greek word for protect there means to keep watch over, to guard, to hold tight. It's not a kind of distant protection like that you get from paying for a remote security company. It's the nearness of a loving parent. Picture a parent hovering close over a toddler while they wobble through their first steps on a busy street, or running beside a child learning to ride their bike, one hand steadying the seat, ready to catch them if they fall. That's the image that Jesus gives us here of the Father's heart. He doesn't guard us like a harsh prison warden. He guards us like a mama bear. This summer, I took part in an extreme canoeing challenge in Algonquin Park. It's called the Brent Run. 2 men, 1 canoe, 170 kilometers of lakes and portages nonstop. It is the hardest thing I've ever done. People have asked, what kept you going through all the exhaustion and the pain and the hallucinations? What kept you going, Steve? And my answer was this: bears. Bears are what kept me going. Or rather, the fear of them did. I did not realize till this summer that there are 2,500 bears in Algonquin. And I didn't want to meet a single one of them, especially not a mama bear. And that's exactly the kind of fierce, loving protection the Father gives his children. The loving terror of a mama bear, protective, powerful, present. I want to lean again into Scott McKnight's scholarship here. He notes that the same Greek word is used to describe a raptor mantling the wings over their young, spreading their wings to shield them and to cover them from harm. That's what Jesus is praying for here. The Father mantling his people, covering you right now. Imagine that, covering you right now, guarding, guiding, gripping. We find joy in knowing that we are not an unprotected people in a dangerous world. We are mantled people under a faithful God. And our strength doesn't come from our grip on God. Turns out it comes from his grip on us. Joy comes from knowing the Father's plan, and joy comes from knowing the Father's protection. Can you feel joy rising in your heart already? Let me finish this morning by saying this. We also find joy in knowing the Father's purpose. Verse 18, Jesus says, "As you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world." This is the moment where Jesus hands the mission to us. He doesn't pray for our escape. He prays for our sending. We're not spectators in a broken world. We are sent ones, kingdom emissaries, carriers of light and truth. One of my favorite authors is an American named Bob Goff. Bob is a wild man for Jesus. His stories always make my stories feel so lame and so tame. He's a lawyer, but he doesn't have an office. He takes all of his meetings at Disneyland. He's a pilot, a preacher, an author, a mentor, and just one of the most joy-filled humans on the planet. The guy is so wild that he even put his personal cell phone number in the back of his book, inviting everyone who reads his book all across the planet to call him anytime that they need him. And guess what? They do. Bob's also a missionary and a podcaster, but my favorite part of his story is that he is the consul general for the country of Uganda. Now, here's what happened. He was doing so much missionary work in Uganda, helping former child soldiers and victims of genocide, that he became close friends with the Governor General of Uganda. And over time, that friendship grew, and it grew so deep that whenever the Governor General visits the United States, he doesn't stay at the United Nations or in a fancy hotel. He comes and he stays at Bob's house. And in order for that to happen, Bob's house had to become a consulate of Uganda, flags and all. I love that image. It's really stuck with me because I think that is what happens to every believer through the work of Christ, through his cross, his resurrection, and his ascension, is that Jesus has now come by his Spirit and taken up residence in you and in me and in our hearts, turning each of our lives and our community together into a consulate of heaven, a place where he plants his flag and he says this: the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Can you imagine that? Your neighbors with a flag outside your house saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Guys, we are on diplomatic service from the kingdom of light to the kingdom of darkness, and we have work to do. That's what sanctification means here in this passage, to be set apart for a purpose. Jesus prays, sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. In other words, shape them by what's true so that they can live as truth tellers in a world full of lies. When we know who we are and why we're here, joy naturally follows, because joy isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of purpose. And when we live sent, loving our neighbors, serving our communities, reflecting the truth of Jesus, we rediscover why we're here, and that brings unending joy. Joy comes when we discover the Father's plan, the Father's protection, and the Father's purpose. Let me finish with one more story. When it comes to discovering joy, we need to think of it like strength training. Nehemiah very astutely said, the joy of the Lord is your strength. So how do we build that kind of strength in a twisted world? I think it's like going to the gym. We have to start small. But starting small, we get stronger and stronger and stronger. In 2 Timothy, Paul instructs his young apprentice Timothy to endure hardship. I think that's a very helpful term. The Greek word hypomeno literally means to remain under. I love that picture. It's about choosing to remain under pressure, remain in tension so that you become stronger. In other words, stay in the weights room, get stronger, start small, then lift more, lift heavier. That's how we become strong in joy. We choose joy. And then every day we go back and we choose joy again and we remain under. During the pandemic, we all found strange ways to make our days interesting. And I decided that my hobby was going to be holding a plank. I'd read a guide in Men's Health about building endurance and how to really build a strong core through planking. And so I started on day one and I just had to hold it for 30 seconds and it was so hard. And then I came back the next day and I added another 30 seconds. And then I came back the next day and added another 30 seconds. And the pandemic lasted so long. By the time I quit, I could hold a plank for 30 minutes. Now, that sounds really boring, so I'd put my iPad under me and watch an episode, something on Netflix. But it taught me about remaining under, choosing tension, choosing building strength, coming back day after day after day. And that's like joy. We choose joy and we come back the next day and we choose joy again. And we come back the next day and we choose joy again and it becomes our strength. Of course, today I could hardly hold a plank for 30 seconds again. But anyway, that's just how strength works. You don't use it, you lose it. Joy works in the same way. It's not passive, it's practiced. It's not denial, it's endurance. And it grows every time we remain under the weight of this twisted world, trusting that God is still good, still sovereign, and still working out his plan. Joy is our strength for living in this twisted world. Joy is Jesus's prayer and promise for you living in this twisted world. And joy is found in knowing the Father's plan, the Father's protection, and the Father's purpose. So church, remain under, choose joy, and let the world hear the accent of heaven in your voice. Amen.